All right, Mr. Wilson, thank you so much for being here today. It's such an honor and pleasure to have you and finally see you again, but on Zoom.
Yeah, my pleasure. Nice to see you.
All right, so Mr. Ransom Wilson is a soloist with 3 times Grammy nominations, music director at Redlands Symphony, and also flute professor at Yale School of Music. All right, so let's start by talking about when you first started, right? Looking back a little bit, growing up, did you always know that you wanted to be a musician?
I knew that I liked music. We had an old piano in the house, and I used to play around on it. But and nobody was encouraging me necessarily, so I didn't really know. I just thought, oh well, yeah, I like to do this. That's all. I didn't really think, yeah, I'm going to be a musician for the rest of my life. Um, it wasn't until I was in the deep South, in Alabama, and everything's about football. So they took, music is there basically to support the football program. So people start thinking about getting into a marching band, So about that time, like fifth grade, sixth grade, they ask you to choose an instrument if you want to play in the band. So I listened and looked, and then I read a little thing about each instrument, and the two that appealed to me the most were the English horn, because they said it was melancholy, and that's certainly a big part of my personality, and the piccolo, because they said you could hear it over the whole orchestra. And it's funny, they were both two kind of auxiliary instruments, not like strings or anything. But then I tried to start on piccolo, and they said I couldn't. I had to play flute first, and so that's how I ended up being a flute player. But very quickly it became, kind of the central focus of my life. It was like the first thing that I could do that really gave me so much pleasure.
When did you start realizing that?
I started when I was 12, and it only took about a month before I realized that I was going to be really good at this. And then my mother bought me for Christmas a series of private lessons with this woman who turned out to be really wonderful. And she was a speech therapist, but she was trained as a flute player, and she was a very good flute player. And she was just a great teacher. She started talking early on about color in the sound and that kind of thing, which for a 12-year-old is a pretty hard concept. But the way she was able to explain it made it really alive for me. And it's interesting now that even after all these years, one of the things that makes my playing different from other people's is it has so much color. So I thank that woman for that.
Interesting. So in terms of I guess the music career aspect wasn't a major thing that you always had to think about.
When you're in a small town in Alabama, and the only music you hear around you is marching band, then it kind of limits your thinking. So I thought, well, I'm really good at this, so I guess I'll be a band director. That was the highest career I could think of at the time. But then my parents noticed in the newspaper this little article about an art school that was being formed in North Carolina School of the Arts, and they had just started, and they couldn't find enough students, believe it or not. So they put not advertisements, but articles in every newspaper around the country. And we saw that and decided to audition. At that point, I was about almost 14, I guess. And, and I went there and I realized, wow, this is a whole school of people like me, that really enjoy this and really dedicated to it. And then I met people who they were career musicians. So you're depending upon what you're exposed to, your thinking enlarges. So I'm glad that I was exposed to what I was exposed to.
Right. That's interesting. I think the environment really matters. For me, it was not. I think it was a very similar experience for me. I started in Charlottesville, Virginia, where the resource is very limited. I was very lucky to meet a very good teacher, James Tobin. Thank him for inspiring me to play the instrument. but small town, the resources were limited. So it was not until I went to Interlaken for summer camp that I had the exposure of suddenly everyone around me was in love with music. And that was such a different feeling because, in Virginia, I think, it's the same thing was probably football or basketball, more like athletics programs or getting more attention than the music program. We have a very, very small band program. And I was like the only kid who would say after 4 p.m. in school to practice. And then people would look at me like kind of weird. But, I was glad that I had the gut to do that. So it prepared me for, a new adventure, I think. And ultimately got me to Idyllwild, which I had the luck to meet you. Again, I always really appreciate you to give me all those extra coaching and help after rehearsal. I knew you were always intentionally doing that, but we have such a short time before I graduate to meet. So, but always appreciative of what you did to me.
Yeah, well, what I noticed up at Idyllwild, because we met kind of recently up there, but I was there for 10 years before the time when I met you. I
Oh,
was
really?
there. I was there back, yeah, like starting like 20 years ago. I was there for 10 years, and I noticed that even though it's a small school and it's and particularly the arts education was really very good, what made the biggest difference was individual instruction. Like being able to take somebody like you aside and say, "Hey, you should do that. You could be doing this better," or whatever. And just having that personal connection seems to make the biggest difference for people. And I mean, interestingly enough, one of our students during that period was Lee Young, who's now
Yep.
principal oboe of the New York Philharmonic,
That is right. Yep.
and he was he was a terrible student at the time.
I've
He
heard
never
of
went.
some stories, but
Yeah, he never went to class, and academic classes he just had no use for. And so they kicked him out. And it's hard to think sometimes that somebody as great as Leon actually got kicked out of school. But he,
yeah, it's such
and
an amazing player.
it changed his life though, because realizing that he actually was in control of his own future made a big impression on him. And now he's a big supporter of the school. He donates money and stuff. But I remember him well. And he, one of his classmates was a violinist who was in a similar situation. He was like a wild child. He just couldn't go to class. He couldn't do what he was supposed to do. And I took him aside. This is when I knew he was going to be leaving the school. They were expelling him. And I took him aside and I said, you're really talented. You should think about this. You should realize that this is all up to you. And it was a very short little talk, but I heard from him many years later saying that one talk changed his life. I mean, I'm not saying that I have anything special to say, but the individual attention, and at when you're a troubled teenager, just having an adult who really cares, who's not your parent, because it's so difficult with your parents. That seems to make a really big difference. So whenever people ask me, like at schools, like what should we be doing, I say get individual time with faculty. Just it doesn't even matter what the issue is. Just some individual attention for kids at that age makes a really big difference.
Yeah, I'd agree. My advisor is Doug Ashcraft,
Oh,
which I
yeah.
think I'll be speaking soon on this podcast as well. Um,
Great.
yeah, always checking in, always giving me attention. And the funny story was, so the person who recommended me to go to Idyllwild, right, who sort of recruited me, was Yao Guanzhai. I don't know if he was there while you were there. He's
Yes.
so he's
Yeah.
now principal of Baltimore Symphony. We're still in touch, always giving me mentorship while I was there, before I was there, and now at this point. So his advice was also Doug.
Oh,
So
really?
yeah, so we
Nice.
had this mutual relationship that was just very special. And I agree. I think, I see people getting kicked out around me as well. Well, my little short 2 years there, it made me really appreciate the experience even more because, I couldn't agree more with this individual time, because that's how we build this relationship
Yeah.
of knowing each other, after a few years and reaching out back, and you're still taking my invitation on the podcast. And it all started with those little coaching moments that, with very limited amount of time, but they made all the
Yeah.
difference.
It's amazing. It's very powerful, that human connection. Particularly teenagers are difficult. It's a really hard time of life. I mean, I know I was a very difficult teenager. It was like everybody has a bad teenager year, and so having somebody that actually cares, that is not your parent, because that's important, because it's too complicated with your parents to get that kind of closeness at that age.
Sometimes people don't like to listen to their parents,
No, of course not. Yeah.
And for me, I feel like it happened a lot of times. Is my parents taught me some principles, right, in life. That, I listened, and then here and there, and I try to follow. Sometimes there are disagreements, and then it makes a deeper impression for me when somebody else like you address the same principle to me, and then I actually take them. So I think I
Right.
totally agree. Again, with Doug, with people like you, all the mentorship, or sometimes just one sentence or two really makes a huge difference. Really makes a
Yeah.
huge difference.
Yeah, and the thing is that you never know, if you're in my position, I never know what sentence it's going to be
Yep.
that
Yep.
makes the big difference. I mean, but the important thing is to just be there and do it. And yeah, it's powerful. And I sometimes think that the educational system has forgotten that, particularly like public schools and stuff. They have like massive classes, and very often the teacher is just trying to control the chaos and the violence in the class. And just a little individual time just changes everything.
Right. Idaho is such a good place, and it gives actually a lot of hardship to me, because I had to take my lessons every Wednesday in LA. So it's a lot of hardship, but I think the experience itself made it, all worth the time. And I think anybody listening to the podcast, we have some high school students who want to go there, and some of them actually reach out to me to go there. So, I put them in touch and stuff. If you want to go to Idaho, definitely, I think it's a great place to go. Just the faculty there is truly amazing. I think there's no other art high school in the States that has college level faculties like Idyllwild. So I think the biggest difference it would make is the faculty. For me, as a junior in high school, I was studying with teachers at Colbert. So for that experience, it's truly just, there's no other such thing like that out there. So it's very, very special.
It's true. I mean, it's when you're in Idlewild, you have the feeling that you're in the middle of nowhere. And it's a beautiful nowhere, but in fact, it's 2 hours away from Los Angeles, which is one of the big music centers in the world. So yeah, so you have both. It's beautiful in that way, because it's this little tiny mountain town, and you can think you're in the 19th century, and then just 2 hours down the mountain, and you're in this major metropolis with a great symphony orchestra and conservatories. And yeah, it's a unique spot.
Yep, for sure. All right, let's talk a little bit more about your teaching aspect, right? You teach at the Yale School of Music, which great university, great school. So for those of the people listening who try to, start a teaching career in music, be a professor just like you, what are some tips and strategies for them to get started or ultimately get a position at the university?
Well, I mean, it's different than when I started out. Now, I mean, now most jobs require a DMA.
That is
So
right.
if you
Yep.
if you really want to have a teaching career, then you need to go that DMA route. Um, there is one thing for foreign students that they often overlook. Um, because it's hard to get the green card and it's hard to get the O1 visa even. I mean,
Right.
it's not impossible, but you have to really work hard for it. And but there is this system in place of these teaching assistantships. So after you've got your master's degree, there are all these jobs are all over the country, teaching assistantships, and so you get free tuition to do your DMA. At the same time, you're also getting a salary from whatever ensemble you're playing in. You're playing in a string quartet or a wind quintet or something like that. And so you're kind of partially on the faculty.
Hmm.
So you're paying taxes, and that's really important. So that when you then apply for your O1 or your green card, they already know who you are.
Hmm.
So it's much easier to get it then. And every one of my students who's taken that advice has gotten a green card. The ones that didn't take my advice don't have the green card. It's pretty clear, I have some friends that are immigration lawyers, and they said, yeah, that's the best thing you could possibly do is take one of those assistantship jobs.
Very interesting.
And people don't think about it so much, right? And it doesn't matter so much for American students, but people from other countries that are trying to stay here and try to have a career here, that's the number one best way to do it.
Hmm. And they can get a green card fast.
Yeah, you can. Yeah. And once you've got a job, once somebody's accepted you as their professor, green card is much easier to get. I mean, pretty much you can get it.
Interesting. So your students basically took this route, and then were they doing a performing career or a teaching career, or what are some typical ways your students did it?
Well, they were all doing DMA, so they were looking for a teaching career. On the other hand, it's hard. You can get the I forget the name of the visa that for a foreign student that's staying in this country just to study. Is that
I think it's F1.
F1, okay.
Yep.
And that one's easy to get when you're in a school, but then when you graduate, you've either got one year of OPT, the optional professional training, and then you're forced to go back to your country, and then it's hard to get back. So I tell people, don't take the OPT, because once you do, you have to go back after that. So take the OPT as late as you possibly can. Stay in school. And one way some people stay in school is to take these teaching assistantships. So they're officially a student for many, many, many more years. It's hard. I don't know. I don't know why the U.S. government makes it so difficult for musicians to stay here. They just have different.
I think it's for everybody. Everybody, whether you want to do business, I think tech nowadays is somewhat easier because there's a huge demand. But other than that, I think it's the same level of difficulty. I think every one of us is having the option to decide, or sometimes not even having the option to think like whether we should stay here or go back to where we're from. But
Well, I mean, and to go back to your question, which I got away from, whether you're American or from another country, if you want to have, there are all kinds of teaching careers that you can have. I mean, you could move to a large city and teach privately, and if you're going to be a performer, then I think you have to think, what is it you're after? What do you want to live in New York or LA and be part of this big freelance scene, which is hard work, because more people available than there are jobs. So it's constantly, you're always worried about when your next paycheck is coming. Or you can go to a smaller place where you're just going to be teaching privately and not have very many performance opportunities. But some people like that. It's not what I did. I wanted to be a soloist. So that was my goal, was to be a soloist. And so I taught privately, and then I had some small, a couple of years at Manhattan School where I taught, and some Juilliard pre-college. But I don't really have the academic credentials to be able to get a job like Yale. But luckily, if it's a conservatory, like Yale is a conservatory, they don't care about your academic degree. They just care about your reputation and your experience. So, since I had a lot of experience playing, once I did become a soloist, I was playing recitals and concertos and stuff everywhere. That was enough experience for a place like Yale or Juilliard or Eastman or Curtis, where they don't care about the degree, they care about the reputation and experience. But those jobs, there aren't that many jobs like that, and you're not going to get one of those when you're very young, probably, because again, you need to have quite a reputation established. So most people end up having to go the academic route. And so then there are some schools, I mean, you need to have a bachelor's, obviously, and master's. And then at that point, you've got to get a DMA if you want to have a hope of teaching someplace good. So there's 2 or 3 places that do not require a dissertation. You're like 2 recitals is the same as 1 dissertation or something like that. So no big paper. And so a lot of musicians go to one of those is Stony Brook, Boston University, University of Texas at Austin, interestingly enough. And they're all over, but that seems to be important to have the DMA. So if you're not a very kind of bookish kind of person, you don't want to be at a place where they require big paper, So, think about going to BU or Stony Brook or one of those places.
So what was the time that you feel like your solo career was starting, or did you have a management, or how did you get the solo performance part of your life started?
Well, at least, it's a little different now because there's all this online stuff that wasn't around when I was a kid.
That is true. Yeah.
So, but, I think you have to be 100% focused on what your goal is. That has to be all you want. And, and you have to be obsessed, like insane, crazy for it in order to make it really work,
And then to hope for having a little bit of a chance of working, right? So the odds odds are very little. Yeah.
It's very risky. But I think when you're in that mindset of saying, okay, that's the only thing I care about in life is getting that career, then everything you see becomes a decision about that career. Every glass of water that's put in front of you is somehow related to your career, and you think that way. It doesn't make you a very nice person to be around usually.
Too competitive, you mean?
Yeah, but it does, but it will result in you'll get results from it. So I mean, I was excited by this flute player, Jean-Pierre Rampal. He was the most famous flute player in the world, and he was an exciting musician. And so I made sure that I got close to him because I wanted to do what he was doing. So that's my advice to, like, if you want to be, let's say you want to be a solo violist, you got to get to know the people who are successful at it and find out how they do it. It's not, because it's not just, I mean, somebody doesn't say, okay, you're the best camera on this iPad is so hard to find. You're the best violist in the world, and so you're going to have a career. It doesn't work that way at all. You can sit in your apartment and be the best violist in the world, and nobody will care. You've got to get out there and show your product, basically, to be very crass about it. So if if you want to be a solo violist, then you've got to find out there's like 2 or 3 people in the world that are successful at that. You got to get to know one of those people. And that will open all the doors that you need, because you won't even know what all the doors are until you talk to that person. And that's how it worked for me. That's how it worked for me. I've met Rampal. He saw something in me that he wanted to develop, and that's how it all happened for me. I mean, I think if you were if you're, say you wanted to be in a string quartet, and you don't want to be a soloist, but you want to be in a great string quartet, you need to get to know the people who are in those string quartets and start talking to them. First of all, because they need to know about you too, because they want to know who's the next generation, who's coming up after us. That's it. It goes back to our first observation, which is that the environment really matters. So if you want to be if you want to be in the middle of things, then don't move to a comfortable part of the country. Don't move to Florida or something like that, because it's not going to happen for you. I just moved to Southern California, but I'm at the end of my career. I'm in the final chapters of my career, so I have the luxury of living in a nice place. But if you're at the beginning of your career, you have 2 choices: LA or New York. That's it. There's no place else where you're gonna reach the top. I mean, maybe you don't want to reach the top, then it's okay. You can live in Chicago or Cincinnati or whatever. But if you want to be at the top, New York is actually number 1, and LA is second.
Demand is so big there.
It is, but also the risk is very big.
Yeah.
And you'll probably end up working for Starbucks for a couple of years. I mean, that's what happens. I mean, unless you happen to have rich parents or something, that's what happens. That's what I did. I worked for AT&T. I was broke, but I didn't want an orchestra job. I knew I wouldn't flourish in that environment. I like conducting orchestras, but I don't like playing in them very much. It just doesn't work for me.
Interesting. Yeah, I was talking to happened to be a violist, happened to make it in his freelancing career, solo career. He's very entrepreneurial. He's taking advantage of all those online stuff, has a big following on social media. And he was telling me the same thing. He lived in New York, now he's in LA. It's a lot of hustling. It's a lot of bits and bolts of picking up things here and there, and then sometimes playing gigs that he had no desire to play for the people that he has no desire to work with, and it's very hard to make it. But if you have the gut to stick with it. Here's something he told me. So he said, if you want to take this music career seriously, you better buckle up because it's a lot of a lot of adventures waiting for you. But
it's a rough ride.
Yeah. Hey, so let's dig into this part a little bit, right? So we often have those choices, right? So for me, I go to Northwestern, which top school, has many choices, right? Besides music, and I'm doing more things besides music. But anyways, that's beyond the point. So what I'm trying to ask is, so we often have these 2 choices in life, whether we chase money or we chase happiness, right? And I think that's a huge debate I'm seeing with one side of my business friend, who would often choose to chase, the money and the branding, the image of the big firms and stuff. And the other side is the music part, right? People are chasing more relative happiness. So for you, having to have this experience of, going through some hardship, making it music a comfortable living, which one do you think is really good for teenagers to be aware of? Or which one should we chase?
Well, yeah, I mean, your parents will probably tell you that music is not a good choice because you never know if there's enough money. So I always tell people, you have, if you want to be a musician, then it has to be because nothing else will do for you. Nothing else will make you happy. If there's anything else that will make you happy, do that instead, because music is really hard. Having said all that, one thing that I've noticed is that, there are a lot of, like, for example, there are a lot of doctors that were musicians before. I know lots of them, and there are even doctors' orchestras in New York and LA. With all doctors, and they just play on the weekends or whenever they're free, and they're very happy when they're playing. And I sometimes I envy them, because they can play music just for pleasure, and then they can leave it because the money is being made elsewhere. In a certain way, they're luckier than we are, because they don't have they have all the pleasure of music with none of the trouble. But that's not enough for me. I could never do that, because if you're going to be in music, you're going to be in it for the good and the bad. It's like having a relationship with someone. Like there's going to be ups and downs, and so it's not something that you want to consider lightly. So if you're not willing, excuse me, if you're not willing to go through the bad parts, then don't do it, because there's going to be lots of downtime, lots of times when you're disappointed. I mean, lots of times when you feel like you did your best work and you get a terrible review in the New York Times. That's painful and really, really hard to recover from. So you got to have that kind of dedication, like no matter what, I'm going to be a musician, because it's so much easier everywhere else in life to make money, to just make enough money to have a house and a car and a family. So yeah, it is a choice. I don't know, it's not always hard. It's not always easy to make that choice when you're young. It's not always easy to see what's going on. So I say seek the advice of an older musician, and if you're lucky, someone will tell you the truth.
It's so interesting. I've asked the same question to my first teacher, who's in Charlottesville, gave me the exact same answer, exact same words. He said, Stephen, I told him I want to be a music major. And back then I was like, I want to be a full-time all-in musician, blah, blah, blah. Now my ideas changed. But back then I was telling him I want to be a performer, blah, blah, blah. And he was telling me, okay, Stephen, listen, if you have nothing else to choose in your life, and you want to take this route, go ahead and, buckle up and do it, whatever. And I was pretty shocked, because back then I was extremely passionate. I was like, okay, this is the only thing. And I've, thought many times I was like only 10th grade or something in high school. And I was telling him, he was giving me this like slap in the face. And then I was like, okay, this was not what I was looking for. And then, I met Mr. Jai at the Interlochen for my summer instruction. And he told me similar things. Blah, blah. We had this long conversation. We always go back to this conversation, conversation. And then I met Mr. Gilad, asked the same question, similar answers. And then I met you. I just always appreciate this honesty. I feel like sometimes people are not honest enough to face this reality. They're like, okay, music is this happy career, but they don't cope with like the hard parts of it. So for me, I think my understanding of it, it's finding the right choice for you. And then now I really don't feel like you must get a music major to be involved in music anymore. I started at Northwestern as a dual degree. Some people didn't know that I dropped music, but I dropped it so I have more time to do this, to have more conversation with people that are much older than me, to have this perspectives from musicians about life, about interesting things that I really enjoy doing. Because I realized one thing is I wasn't as passionate as playing as I was before. And I wasn't feeling the way that music was giving me the equally same amount of joy when I play anymore. Because, in college life, you're playing more things that you don't like to play. You're playing more ensembles you don't like to be in, and take more classes, you don't find that enjoyable. It was really taking the fun part away from me playing music. So I think you're absolutely right. People have to think about, are they okay with accepting that side of music before going to music as a major, as a career, whatever. But for me, I realized I really want to do these kind of things more than playing the clarinet, because I'm, impacting people. People are listening, sending me very lovely, nice, notes that really, cherish me and warms my heart. I feel like, doing this is makes it all worth, my time.
Yeah, it's not for the faint of heart, that's for sure. You're lucky if you've begun to realize that you have a slightly different interest than you did when you were younger. You're lucky to discover that now before you get too entangled in something that you find you don't like.
Right.
I'm personally very reluctant to tell someone, like when I'm teaching them, that I don't think they have the talent or whatever, because
That's
my
hard.
experience is that, well, my experience is too that people blossom at different times.
That's true. That's true.
Like
Yep.
like I could say that to someone just at the wrong time, and it would destroy their life. When if I'd waited 2 months, they would have shown me that everything was working. So I'm very reluctant. But I have a couple of times said, I don't think your heart is in this. And there's something I could just tell in the way they're playing, and like I just feel like, in both cases, they said, "You're right. I really want to be this instead," and so it's a dangerous thing to bring up, but I'm lucky in that both times I did that, the people, and they're both now famous in the other field. So
It's all about
so
choices.
it's like not being, but they still played great.
Yeah.
So so they've got the best of both worlds, because they can, they have a solid way of making money and advancing their career, and then music for them is just only the good parts.
That's absolutely what I discovered in this past year of COVID. Because okay, DU degree is hard. Economics and music, I'm doubling, tripling the amount of courses people take as normal college kids. But plus practice and all that time, and that's aside from you taking classes. So I really sit down and then think, all right, which of the ones are the ones that at the moment I really need to study for? I was very lucky. I had really one of the best, for me, it was the best clarinet teachers in the world to teach me in high school. And what I learned from him was this whole system of principles of how to teach yourself on the clarinet. So I can apply to that, with a new piece or whatever. I can basically apply the same principles and then, hear what I'm playing, record myself, and then, basically do the same, but for different levels. So I was really asking myself, do I really need all those extra classes? But for people who didn't have the background, at studying with a very good teacher or having the resource to train in high school, absolutely music major would help. But for me personally, it wasn't really helping that much. And I realized, okay, this music thing, I can really do it on my own. I can still practice. I still knows how to practice. And then I can play just for purely the joy side of it. So that was a tough decision I had to make, but I'm glad I did it. Again, have all this extra energy to do this every single week. And, I'm producing videos every single week, thankfully to Henry, my dear friend who helps me edit so we can make this happen, and really makes the fun part of music come back again. So that's quite special. But sometimes you have to make the tough decision a little bit, otherwise I can't do this. can't do this anymore. All right, let's last two questions before we wrap up. So I always ask this question with almost every single guest of mine, is that if you look back to your younger self, right, what advice would you give yourself, and what are the things you should have or would have done better?
What I would say, some background, is that by the time I was 15, I was like a social recluse, because I was just practicing and listening to music, and that's it. I mean, I had no social life, and that existed all the way through Juilliard and beyond. So I would say, you know, put the instrument down, have a social life. You might actually learn something from somebody else, you know.
That's interesting. That was, sorry to interrupt, but that was the same situation for me when I was in high school. Well, Idyllwild was an isolated place, but
Yeah.
and I wasn't, feeling connected with the people around there, but most of the time. So I just stayed with practicing. And that's pretty much what I did for 2 years. But please go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was doing too in high school. And I mean, it has an advantage in that you form a technical base on your instrument that you never go below. So, people later in life have to struggle to keep their technique. I'm fine because I spent so many hours doing that stuff when I was young. Um, but not having the social stuff, it meant that I had to learn how to interact with other people much later in life than most people did. So it's that's tough. And so I would never. My advice to my younger self would be just get out of the practice room some, and and make friends with people, and and go to parties and stuff. I never did any of that stuff. And and I missed a lot of. I got a lot of great practice time in, but I missed a lot of what life is really for.
Again, you never know who you meet. I feel like sometimes I meet people in college, start a conversation, and then they join my team to work on my startups, or
Mhm.
they're helping me edit. Literally, Henry, we started this conversation because I was visiting Indiana this past Christmas break. He was on my team, but I was trying to figure out whose role was doing what, etc. I was basically doing like 90% of all the work, and I was burning myself out. So we had this very interesting conversation, and then he was like, "All right, Steven, if you need any help, just let me know." I was like, "Okay, yeah, but I'm really trying to push my podcast, and I want to do it every single week to blow it up and then impact more people. But I need a content producer. I can't just sit in my room, edit videos, and then still produce and publish. Just too much work for myself."
Mm.
And he's like, "Okay, why don't I help you?" So that's how I started. So I 100% agree with that. And then now, we're producing every single week, and he's helping me edit. Without his help, this whole thing would not be possible. So again, shout out to Henry. Yeah, and then the same thing with you. If I had never sent the email, if we never
Mhm.
talked, it's not gonna happen. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think people is really what matters the most, especially in music, because it's such a small world.
Yeah, and the thing is that you do actually learn from other people,
Absolutely.
because when you're by yourself, you start to create a world where everything makes sense, and then you talk to one other person and they have an idea that you never thought of, and that completely changes the way you think. And
Extremely true.
and that's really really important. Yeah, I guess the other thing that I would say to myself is, you know, read more books, look at more art, watch performances that are not music, because those are the things that make your performances and interesting. Like like the fact that you've read or seen Romeo and Juliet changes you forever, and changes the way you play that E flat, you know, and it's those little things that enrich you as a human being, and as an artist. And I waited quite long, you know. I instead of doing that, I was practicing,
Yeah. Yeah.
and as we know, there's a certain advantage to that too. Um, but I think it's what makes a performance by a prodigy different from a performance by a great artist. The prodigy may play everything perfectly, and it's exciting because they're so young, and I'm as excited by it as everybody is. But the difference is that you get a great artist that's older. They don't play everything perfectly, but they have some kind of deep artistic insight that comes from having interacted with other great artists and other great artworks. And that's what I wish I had started earlier.
Interesting that you start connecting the dots with different concepts. I learned that, I think, gradually. Just recently, I think the past year or so, I'm starting to hear different colors within solo pieces, right? Solo piano concerts or etc. I'm starting to see different things, and the imagination is truly powerful. And I 100% agree. If you don't take the time to learn about other concepts, this probably will never appear in your mind, and you will never taste the good part of music. It's absolutely
Yeah.
true. Yeah.
Well, I look at somebody like Yo-Yo Ma. You know, I actually heard Yo-Yo when he was 12 years old giving a recital at Juilliard. He was in the pre-college at Juilliard, believe it or not. He was, he was 12, and I had work study, and I was running the lights for the small recital hall at Juilliard, and I heard this cello recital I couldn't believe. You know, it was just a technical level I'd never imagined on the cello. You know, and what he did, instead of going to Juilliard, he went to uh, Cambridge. What am I thinking of?
Harvard, right?
Harvard. Thank you.
Yeah.
He went to Harvard, where he had a full arts education, arts and intellectual education. And I'm convinced that that's part of why he's such a fascinating musician to listen to, because he's not just a great musician and a great cellist. He's thinking about other really interesting stuff that he was exposed to when he was in college. So, I mean, I guess an undergrad degree like that is not for everybody because it's hard work, as you know. But it does show you that if you're exposed to a lot of the greatest information and greatest art, it makes you a better artist.
Yeah. That reminds me again another example of Professor Longi, Jonathan Kohler, clarinetist, that I interviewed. Interesting. He was the first guy that gave me a masterclass. That's someone from the States, for me. So we built a deep relationship, decades ago. But anyways, my point was, he went to Harvard, studied physics there, and he was telling me, was doing music all the time on the side. So he was getting the pure joy of it, and he was getting the academics. And now he's, professor, soloist, like recording artist, doing it all. It's amazing. So I think it really is just, there are many ways of making, I think, your life work. And for me, I think back in high school, I thought, all right, music performance, that's the only way out. I had this tunnel vision, but now my perspectives changed almost on a weekly basis as I'm talking to people like you every single week. And again, going back to the podcast point, I'm doing this at the end. If really, I wouldn't care much about, whether there are 10,000 people listening or, 2 people listening. At the end, it's really purely for me and Henry to learn this idea of getting perspective. And he was telling me the same thing, every week, if, just nobody listens, it's fine. We're getting our education. And that's the most important part. I'm gradually figuring out every single week, it's giving me some unique perspectives that I've never think of before, or it serves as a great reminder for me to, pick up the bits of things that I've learned before that I'm, losing gradually. But it's such a great thing, I think, to have people like you on here to speak and then reminding me about all the things I used to think about. I think before that.
Yeah.
One last thing we can address here before we let you go. It's this is a question that's submitted by one of our listeners. It's, music is a competitive industry, as we talked about, with very limited amount of jobs, right? So how do we deal with jealousy as musicians and not being negative when other people do better?
It's very hard, and it's been a problem since music began. I mean, even I read something from a great musician. I think it was I won't say the name. It was a great violinist. He's not alive anymore. He said, "I don't know which is the greater pleasure, reading my own wonderful reviews or reading bad reviews of my colleagues."
That's interesting.
So it's been around for a long time. It's the hardest thing. I think it's the hardest thing of all, is to be generous enough to realize. But the thing is that, first of all, there's room for everybody. And one of my managers told me that when I was getting all upset about something, jealous about something. he said, there's room for everybody. Jealousy only hurts yourself. It's not hurting that other person at all. It's just making your life more difficult. So, I mean, I'm telling you this as if it's easy, because it's not easy. Because I get jealous every day about something that I hear somebody's doing. But the thing is that the more people that are doing things successfully, the better it is for everybody. So, again, that's the wise thing to think about. That's the high road. I can't always reach it though. Sometimes I'm stuck on the low road and just as angry as everybody else.
It's all the same. It's all the same.
I think it's human nature.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So thank you so much, Mr. Wilson. It's
my pleasure.
Again, such an honor and pleasure to have you on, getting great perspectives as always. And when I visit California, I will definitely come down and then visit you in person.
Love to see you. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
Right.
You have a
Thank
great
you.
one.
Take care. Bye-bye.